Back to the 55 Oldsmobile, the restoration here. There's a popular question on the Oldsmobile groups that everybody wants to know what transmission linkage and throttle linkage they can make to make a different carburetor work. So this is what an original carburetor for a 324 looks like. This is a Rochester 4GC. Specifically, it gets complicated because of the throttle linkage they have. And they have a TV linkage for the transmission that runs off of this. This car happens to be a stick with a 3-speed, so I don't have to use that. But the same bracket that I have made multiple times works. I don't particularly care for the 4GC. Maybe if they're completely rebuilt with new throttle shaft bushings, they work a lot better. I don't personally have the patience to screw around with them. You can put a rebuild kit in them, and then sometimes they run. Sometimes they absolutely won't run, and sometimes they run, well, kind of, sort of. But I prefer the Carter base, Carter, Edelbrock, Weber, much to it, just simpler, and they just have, like, you put a rebuild kit in it and they run. So what I do is I get longer studs, get them at the parts store. I like to retain the original gasket if you can, this big thick thing, because it actually helps keep the carb cool, and like you never have to replace them, it seems. Like they just seal again and again and again. So I like that. I'll put my adapter on. This one isn't quite the right adapter, as you'll see, but it'll work. It's fine. Done it before. Put your new gasket on. And then what I like to do is I'll coat the mating surface with a little bit of grease. It helps keep the gasket from drying up, and when you got to pull it back apart, the grease helps keep everything separate so it doesn't stick. Therefore, in a pinch, you reuse your gasket, and if you're like me, you'll probably use it until you have a problem. So then you take this. This is just a Carter AFB. I think it's off. Seems to me it decoded to like 67, 68 Plymouth 383. But I rebuilt it and I tested it on a Chevy small block, and it ran. And I don't think it ran absolutely perfect, but it ran. It ran a hell of a lot better than I would expect the original Rochester to run, because even when I have the original, what I tend to do is I will keep a spare that has a fresh rebuild kit in it, so that if something does happen, I can get home with it. But they're heavier, they're a lot more complicated, because the base actually comes apart from the throttle body. So there's like way more gaskets than necessary, and technically Carter made the first 4-barrel in 1952. And Oldsmobile actually ran them. They were WCFBs. And then mid-year of 52, GM decided that they needed the Rochester division to make their own 4-barrel because the Carters were too expensive. If you have a 52 or 303 4-barrel, the WCFB bolts right down on them. Unfortunately, these are just a little bigger carburetor than the factory. You can get a Carter AFP with this spreadbore pattern if you look hard enough, but I just happen to have this one. Versus going to buy a brand new Edelbrock for this, which is just unnecessary. Alright, bolts are on. Nuts, I should say. That's the correct terminology. because I am not perfect. I'm going to skip the step here. So I have my adapter plate, I call it, which is basically just a right angle. It just sits there like that. That's all it has to do. That is fine. It's not the most professional thing in the world, no, but you can easily make it. Anybody should be able to make that. I made mine with an angle grinder and a couple of drill bits. It's really not a big deal. The hardest part is fishing the nut in the back and behind there to take care of that. I have never had this carb with this setup before. The last time I did this, I actually used an Edelbrock carb. That was on a 54. I think I need a stubby socket. If applicable, it is. There's no guarantee that that's going to work on either. You don't have to put the reef down on these either. I think that's going to need a ratchet wrench, and it might not turn out perfect this time, but I just want to show everybody how it's done. I might make another video, that other intake that's off. Oh no, that doesn't work where the shit does it. You don't need to worry about this. The Edelbrocks, you can just get this whole thing done with a ratchet. It is much more convenient than this, but what we're doing, I guess. It's fine. Alright, now this car, somebody welded the linkage solid, so we're just gonna not use that because it doesn't allow the pedal to work correctly, in my opinion. Now this is off a car I already ran with this setup, basically. There. Just kind of clips on there. Now I'll slide that in there, I'll put a nut on the back of it, and then figure out, how to adjust this correctly. The Edelbrock is a bit simpler for me, I think. what is going on here? There we go. But just so you guys get a rough idea, this kind of I had to make an adapter for this one because, like, the Edelbrocks have a tab down here. And I didn't really plan this out very well. But like, so even if I got to drill another hole and make a little bracket for it, like, so what? That's no big deal. But this is the gist of it. This kind of rocks. And then again, if you had an original setup, you would have to adjust your TV linkage again. For the slant pan hydromatic that's in them, they run a throttle valve, and it is mandatory to have that on there, and it really needs to be adjusted right or they shift wild. But this is basically the setup. It's just a cheap little bracket, just a really low-tech operation. But I really like these carbs a lot more. They seem to run better when it's cold. They just seem to perform a lot better. And I can get a rebuild kit pretty much anywhere. And I can rebuild this on the side of the road, unlike the Rochester, where most of them either won't, the 4 barrels won't open right, or the choke doesn't work at all, or they don't idle, or some hootenanny, and they cost just as much to rebuild as a brand new carburetor. So if you want to have it sent out to like Carb Specialties or any of those places, it's quite expensive. Whereas you can just buy an Edelbrock, bolt it on out of the box, and it's going to run. Now, in my experience, the Edelbrock 500 that I had, you know, it ran good until like wide open throttle, and then it just seemed like when the 4 barrels open, it kind of was running a little too. It just dumped too much fuel, I thought. Or the original Rochester would really wind up more. But these ones seem to be metered a little more correctly. So that's what we're doing today. I'm going to finish this up, and I got to hook up some wires, and then I'm going to see if this thing wants to start, basically. It should. This engine runs, but alright, I just wanted to show this is how you do this. Maybe it'll save somebody a lot of BS.